It's here. It's out. The first 3 episodes of The Wheel of Time are out. I've only seen the first one so far. I'm pacing myself. Just a little. I'm not gonna wait like a week. I'm gonna watch the other two probably like later today. But I am going to record my thoughts about each individual episode as I watch them. So, a brief introduction. This will be theoretically full spoilers, but full spoilers for the books, I mean. But in the case of this episode, I don't think I'll be mentioning anything past like the first 5 or 6 books. So if you're like halfway through the series on reading it, there shouldn't be any spoilers here for you. If you're someone who hasn't read the series at all, this may not be for you, because I am going to be talking about the future of the story after this first episode, and where I think they're going with some of the changes they've made, and what I think about it. So overall, first of all, overall thoughts on the episode. I think it is the perfect adaptation because, much like the Wheel of Time books, it is really, really good, but also very flawed in some ways. So it gets the right quality level that the books are supposed to have. Specifically, I think that the pacing is a bit too rushed this early on, which is kind of the opposite problem compared to the first book, which has a very slow start. This starts a bit too fast, in my opinion. They sort of rush through the whole Two Rivers section, but that's fine. They're at least it's fine for me as someone who's read the book, so I know what else happened during that time, and sort of some of the nuances that were lost there. I'm not sure how it's gonna be for new viewers who aren't into the books. I'm curious to see how people feel, whether they pick up on everything. But overall, I think this episode is very good. They made some changes that I'm going to talk about. So first of all, not opening with the prologue of the book is probably a good idea. I'm sad about it because I personally would have liked that, but I think that for a new audience who hasn't read the books, the prologue being the first thing they see would have turned people off, because the prologue is a lot. What else? There's the they start instead with what I think is a very clever scene. They start with the capture and gentling of some random male channeler. At least I think he's a random male channeler. I don't think that guy was meant to be like a character that we're going to see again. I think that's a very clever choice, because it establishes very early on what the stakes are for Rand going forward. And also, they specifically chose to portray the taint-induced madness with him seeing and talking to a person who isn't there, which to me seems like clear setup for when Rand starts talking to Lews Therin, and essentially by immediately priming the audience to interpret that specifically as like the primary symptom of taint-induced madness, you are also priming the audience to question Rand's sanity when that starts happening later on, and to sort of create this ambiguity about whether Rand is going mad or not, or whether he's actually seeing the actual Lews Therin, which is also an ambiguity that is present in the books. So I think that was a good choice. Now, at this point, Moiraine says a line that is very strange. She says to Lan, "We're going to the Two Rivers because there are rumors of 4 ta'veren there." Um, which, first of all, there being 4 is good, because Egwene is and has always been ta'veren, and I will fight Robert Jordan over that. It's really, really obvious to anyone who reads the books that Egwene is ta'veren. But what do you mean there have been rumors? They've already been identified as ta'veren? By who? What are you talking about? Maybe that'll get explained further on. Maybe ta'veren means something else in the show, but as right now, that line strikes me as very, very weird, and kind of like just a throwaway line that they're using to explain why Moraine and Lan are going to the Two Rivers. Which, fair enough, the books don't really do a great job of explaining why Moraine, even like how Moraine heard about this or why she's in the Two Rivers. So I get why they wanted to sort of justify somehow her presence there. But it's a weird line. Okay, moving on. In the Two Rivers, lots of things have been changed. And some things have just been added. First of all, I want to say I really, really like the added cultural flavor of the Two Rivers that the show does. I like the women's circle ritual, which is a clear reference to the philosophy of Saidar later on, because of course, in order to pass the test safely, what Egwene, and presumably every other woman in the village, had to do is essentially let go, stop trying to control the flow of the river, and let the river carry her, which is sort of similar to language that is used whenever the way that Saidar is wielded is described. Now, putting aside the sexist implications of Jordan's Saidar Sidon definitions and the different ways they work, I really like this scene. I think it's a really nice thematic bit of world building that like is going to lay the groundwork for some important themes later on. I'm not even sure if they're doing Saidar and Sidin in the show, or if it's just one source. I wonder if that specific like strict division of two different kinds of magic is going to make it into the show. I can see why it might not, and I'm also not sure if I want it to. So I'm not gonna give any opinions on that because I'm not sure what my opinion is. I'm gonna wait and see what they do. I also really liked the way that Beltane has been recontextualized and sort of turned into a festival that is very tied to the cosmology of the Wheel of Time. Like the idea that the point of Beltane is to draw the reincarnating spirits of the dead to reincarnate back in the same place, like back into the same community, is really interesting and neat. And yeah, something like that probably would exist in a world with the theology and cosmology of the Wheel of Time. So I really like that detail. I think the set design is gorgeous. Basically all the work of like all the costuming, all the visuals are great, except some of the special effects when Moraine is channeling. The channeling looks bad. I'm gonna be honest with you. The channeling looks bad. I'm not super bothered by that. Like, that's not high on my list of priorities for this show. But I know it is for some people, and I know some people are gonna be really bothered by that. Which is a shame. I do wish they'd maybe put a bit more time and money and effort into the channeling. But that's neither here nor there. probably the two biggest changes, I would say, in this first episode compared to the books. Well, no, there's one even bigger change, but the two big changes that everyone is probably going to be talking about are the change to the Coffin family and the change to Perrin. So I have very mixed feelings about the Perrin change. I don't mind the idea of him having a wife and that wife dying on Beltane. People are calling it fridging, and it technically is, but I don't think fridging is inherently bad if it's something that happens within the context of like a show with lots of female characters and it's not portrayed as like a very gendered thing. And I don't think that this was. So I don't mind necessarily the fact that it happened. The way that it happened was stupid. Him spinning around and hitting her with the axe, I laughed. That was a comedy beat for me. Like, I literally had to pause the video on Amazon and just go, ha! Because what? Why was that so funny? Why did they film it that way? It was weird. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just a horrible person. So that didn't really work for me. And also, it's kind of pointless. Like, I get what they're going for with it. Perrin has this whole thing about, like, oh, I don't know my own strength. I need to be careful not to hurt the people around me because I'm so big and strong in the books. And that's kind of an important part of his character, especially early on. And I guess in the show they're going to imply that that's, like, a direct result of this. And I think that's kind of dumb, because I don't think it's necessary. I think big, strong guy is careful not to hurt people with his big, strong body is not exactly a character trait that requires much explanation. It's fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. Which is why in the books it's not ever really explained. It's just like, yeah, this is who he is. He's like, when he was a kid, he accidentally hurt the other kids while playing, so now he doesn't want to. The end. It feels a bit weird to, like, give a tragic backstory to that, but it could work. I'm gonna withhold judgment because they might do something more interesting with it. However, there is something weird going on between Perrin and Layla. Layla, was that her name? Yes, Layla. There's like this weird tension and vibe like throughout the whole episode before her death, and at one point I think we see some weird scars on her arm that those might be like blacksmithing scars. I don't know if that's a thing that happens to blacksmith, like those particular kind of scars, maybe from like molten metal or something, but I'm going to assume not, because it feels like the camera kind of focuses on them. And I'm really worried about that, because this is just sort of my wild theory here, but what I think that might be implying is that Perrin has, in the past, already been going into, like, wolf mode and hurting his wife. Like, while in some kind of rage. Please don't let that be the thing they're doing. I really, really hate that idea if it's what they're going for. I could be totally wrong here. We'll wait and see until it's confirmed, one way or the other. But if that's what's happening there, I hate it. Perrin, well, not Perrin overall, but early books Perrin, like first 4 books Perrin is my favorite character in the Wheel of Time, and please don't make him a domestic abuser. What the fuck? Again, could be totally off the mark there, so I'm not going to go any more into that until I know for sure if that's what they're doing. Now, controversial opinion. The changes to the Coffin family are very good, and I like them. It's just a straight up improvement over the source material. So in the books, the Coffin family is kind of just like a normal family, and Abel Coffin is actually kind of a great dad. Like, he travels all the way to Tarvalon to check on his son, and he's shown to be like a very honorable, just, good man. We don't really get much characterization on Matt's mom, except that she's like kind of strict. And we don't even really get much characterization on the sisters, except that they kind of like bully Matt, which is a weird character trait for younger siblings to have, but also very true to life. In the show, however, it's clear that this is a very dysfunctional, broken family with like an alcoholic, like the parents are alcoholics, they're abusive to each other, probably to their kids as well sometimes. Like, it's bad. Like, this family is bad to be in. And I think that works much better than the family that he has in the books. Because frankly, Matt's always kind of read to me as like a kid from a broken home, like a kid who hasn't had any positive role models, doesn't have a good home life. He just wants to get away from the nightmare that's waiting for him at home. Like, he has this vibe of like a kid who's been treated like shit by his parents and just wants to leave. And also hasn't had positive role models in his life. And then in the books, that just kind of isn't the case. Like, he has that personality, but then he has a normal family and a really good role model in Abel or Abel. So it kind of, there was always like something disjointed about that. Whereas now I think with this change, a lot more of Matt's character and personality and motivations are going to make sense. It's going to make sense that he's the one of the boys who really does not want to return to the Two Rivers. He does not want to think about his old life. He wants to move on. He wants to travel. He wants to see the world. He doesn't miss his family, unlike Rand and Perrin. He does, etc. So I just think this is a straightforwardly good thing. I have no criticisms about the changes to the Coffin family, which I think a lot of people will. So I'm curious to hear what people have to say about that, if anyone leaves a comment. What else? Yeah, it's weird that Perrin's actual family, like his parents and siblings, weren't introduced here. Because obviously the fact that he has an extended family in the Two Rivers is going to be very important a couple of seasons down the line if they're sticking to that storyline from the books. Maybe they're still doing that. Maybe they're not. We'll see. I'm open to seeing where that goes. What else did they change? Right. Rand and Gwen have sex. Which I'm of two minds about. So on the one hand, I think it's very good that the show is not sticking to Robert Jordan's extremely Catholic, like, weird hang-ups around sex that made it into his world building. Like, the attitudes towards sex in the book are straight up weird sometimes and kind of uncomfortable, and I'm glad they're not doing that. I'm glad they're doing like a healthier attitude towards sex with the characters. However, having specifically Rand be sexually experienced and not be a very naive and sort of precocious virgin is a weird call, I think, because I think a lot of Rand's later interactions with Celine in book 2, with Avienda in books 4 and 5, with Min in book 7, very much hinge on him being very sexually inexperienced and naive and a virgin. So I'm not saying it's a bad change, but it is a change that is going to require them to also change other things. And if they don't change those other things later on down the line, it's going to seem weird that they changed this. Like, there's going to be like a weird disconnect, I think. So hopefully they know what they're doing. I do think they do. I have faith in them. So I'm going to, for now, say that this is a good change, with the caveat that it's also one that they could kind of screw up. What else? Oh, right. The maybe the biggest change that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about, because everyone online that I've seen who's talking about the first episode is talking about Perrin and Matt, like their family issues. Maybe the biggest change is Moiraine just straight up being like, hey, one of you guys is the Dragon Reborn, let's go. Which is a huge change from the first book, because the first book, I think actually from what I remember, the entire, like, none of our main characters even get an inkling of an idea that this is all about the Dragon Reborn until early in the second book, I think, is when Rand is first told by Moiraine and Swan that he's the dragon, and he doesn't believe them. So having all of the characters know right from the start the stakes should really change the vibes of a lot of this season compared to the first book. Because for most of the first book, these characters do not have any sense that they are important, or that this whole thing is about them. They very much feel like just random bystanders who got caught up in this thing. Obviously, we as the readers know right from the start that this is about the Dragon Reborn, and it's pretty obvious who the Dragon Reborn is. But the characters don't. And I'm curious to see how them knowing is going to change their attitudes and interactions throughout this season. Finally, just a couple of random little tidbits. I love the shot early on in the episode of the futuristic buildings ruined and overgrown. That's the kind of world building I want from Wheel of Time. And I love that they're going for it. I love that they're not trying to sort of hide from the weirder, more out there elements of Wheel of Time's world building. I'm hoping we get to see a lot more of that going forward, and I'm hoping that when we start seeing things like Ruidine or the Tower of Genji and stuff like that, I'm hoping that the visuals there are suitably bizarre and futuristic and strange and not typical fantasy. Because that's what this setting calls for, I think. And finally, the choice to make the dragon prophecy gender neutral is interesting. On the surface, I like it, because it's very much a case of, like, the fact that it wasn't gender neutral is kind of tied to Robert Jordan's fairly regressive cosmology when it comes to gender. Like, the metaphysics of gender in the Wheel of Time are kind of really bad. And I'm glad they're changing that. But I don't... The issue here is that the dragon is feared and hated at the start of the series. Being the Dragon Reborn is not a good thing. No one wants the Dragon Reborn to return. The idea of the Dragon Reborn returning is horrifying to people. Because he's a male channeler, and male channelers are terrifying. Now, it seems, based on how how Moiraine just openly tells them that one of them is the dragon and how they don't particularly react to that. I think the show isn't really doing the whole people hate the dragon reborn thing, which I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like that's a fairly important part of the themes of the story. We'll see going forward if I feel like that's really missing. Um, but uh, but yeah, I don't know how to feel about this. I think it's good that Gwen is getting her due and being treated as an equal candidate, and I think it's good that the metaphysics of gender have been changed, so that now you don't necessarily have to reincarnate as the same gender. I think these are very positive changes, but I think that the change to the general societal attitude about the Dragon Reborn, which I think is directly or indirectly a result of the changes to the metaphysics of gender, is a bit of an issue. Now, by the time it becomes clear that Rand is the Dragon Reborn, I imagine that the attitude will be fairly negative towards him, because by that point it will be a fact that the dragon is a male channeler, so people will respond accordingly. But I feel like a big part of Rand's hesitation to be the Dragon Reborn before he accepts it is just that he's been culturally programmed, socialized to fear the Dragon Reborn and to sort of like cringe at the very thought of it. And I don't get that vibe from the show. I feel like the Dragon Reborn is not being treated as like a bad thing. We'll see. It just got mentioned offhandedly at the end of the episode, and no one seemed to react very much. So we'll see where they go with that. Anyway, that's all I... No, I have one more thing to say. Tom is missing. Tom isn't there in the Two Rivers. And we know that Tom is in this season. Like, we know he's been cast. We've seen him in trailers. So I'm guessing they're probably going to meet Tom later on, maybe in Bear Lawn or Whitebridge, even. I think that's a good call. I think that the Eye of the World is a bit too front-loaded with character introductions. Like, every single main character gets introduced before they ever leave the Two Rivers, and like really only Loyal gets introduced later on. So I'm okay with that change. I think that sort of pacing the character introductions is good. And Nynaeve getting kidnapped by Trollocs is also an interesting choice. I'm guessing that they're gonna rescue her in the second episode or something. Or she's gonna rescue herself and just join them. So yeah, I'm gonna go watch the second episode now. This was a really promising start. There are some problems, but I'm happy about how this is starting. I'm not currently like worried about whether this show is gonna be good at all. Like, it's gonna be good. It's from what we've seen so far. It's just a question of whether it'll be great. See ya.